Hello there, welcome to this Carbon Academy tutorial on A-level biology. In this video we will look at the human respiratory system. This will be covered in two parts, and here we'll look at the gross anatomy of the respiratory system and its adaptation in maximizing gas exchange. Here are the aims of this tutorial. We'll look at the importance of ventilation and describe the gross anatomy of the respiratory system and explain how air flows into and out of the lungs, and then look at the process of inspiration and expiration, and finally see how the alveoli are adapted for maximum gas exchange. This might seem like a daft question, but it's important to understand why we need to breathe in the first place. Large organisms like us have a small surface area to volume ratio. Therefore, exchange systems are needed to transport oxygen into and carbon dioxide out of the cells that are deep within the body. The oxygen is used for respiration to provide energy needed for survival, and carbon dioxide is a toxic product made in the process. No big surprises here. Now, what makes the respiratory system? Ultimately, air enters our body via the nose or the mouth, then through the pharynx, also known as your throat, and then the larynx, also known as the voice box, then the trachea, which is called the windpipe, and then through the bronchus, then bronchiole, and the alveolus. Note that the bronchioles and the alveolus make up the lung. To assist with our breathing, the rib cage, diaphragm, and the intercostal muscles are involved. A question to ponder is, when would we breathe through our mouth mostly, and why? Comment below. Looking at the anatomy of the respiratory system, we find that the trachea and the bronchus contain cartilage, because this prevents them from collapsing when breathing out. This is important because without it, breathing in would be like blowing through a deflated balloon. You may know how difficult it is to blow through the first bit, and that is if you have ever blown a balloon yourselves. Anyways, do note that bronchi is the plural of bronchus, which is different to the term bronchiole, as we'll see now. Unlike the trachea and the bronchus, the bronchioles and alveoli don't have cartilage because they need to stretch. To do this, they have elastin, but they also have surfactant to prevent them from collapsing when breathing out. We'll learn more about this later in this video. In terms of the rib cage, we have 12 ribs in total. Ribs 1 to 7 are called true ribs because they attach directly to the sternum, while ribs 8 to 10 are called false ribs because they don't attach directly, and ribs 11 and 12 are floating because they don't attach to the sternum at all. This information is useful to know, but it's not needed for A-level. There are two types of intercostal muscles. Inter means between and costal means rib. So these are muscles in between the ribs. And internal intercostal muscles are involved in forced expiration, while external intercostal muscles are involved in inspiration. The alveolus is the main functional unit of the lung, and they arise as the bronchioles terminate as the alveolar sac. The term alveolus is singular, and many alveolus together are called an alveoli. Note that the alveolus has a dense capillary network, and the benefit of this we'll see later on. The surfactant I mentioned previously is a fluid that prevents the alveoli from collapsing when breathing out. It is the yellow color lining in the image. This allows the alveoli to fill up with air without much resistance. The alveolus is adapted in many ways to carry out its function. Due to its bulb shape, a large volume of air per alveolus can be taken in. As many capillaries surround the alveoli, a steep concentration gradient can be maintained. The alveolar epithelium and the capillary endothelium are each one cell thick, meaning that the diffusion pathway is short. Finally, many alveoli connect to one bronchiole, so there is a large surface area for diffusion. Now, ventilation refers to breathing in and out, called inspiration and expiration respectively. There are a few points to understand before learning about this process. Firstly, oxygen always moves down a pressure gradient when entering the lungs. It then moves into the blood down a diffusion or concentration gradient, whichever term you prefer. Equally, carbon dioxide exits the blood down a diffusion gradient and the lungs down a pressure gradient. If either one of these gradients is not present, oxygen cannot reach the cells. Hope that makes sense. An important law that governs ventilation is the Boyle's law, which you may remember from GCSE. The law states that volume is inversely proportional to pressure, and keep this in mind as it's important for what we'll see next. For air to enter the lungs, the lung pressure must be lower than atmospheric pressure, hence creating a gradient. And for this to happen, the volume of the lungs must increase, which is done by creating a vacuum. This occurs due to the contraction of the external intercostal muscles and the diaphragm, which flattens during inspiration. Additionally, the ribs move up and outwards, further reducing the pressure and hence increases lung volume. Ultimately, air enters the lungs down a pressure gradient. Note, inspiration is an active process because the muscles contract and hence energy is needed for their contraction. Equally, for air to exit the lungs, lung pressure must be greater than atmospheric pressure, and so volume of the lungs must decrease. For this to happen, there is relaxation of the external intercostal muscles and diaphragm muscles which move up during expiration. The ribs move down and inwards. Air exits the lungs again down a pressure gradient. And note, expiration is a passive process because the muscles are not contracting. Okay, you may be thinking, when are the internal intercostal muscles used? Like I mentioned previously, they are used in forced expiration, which requires energy since they contract. A phrase we often use in medicine is blow out the candles, because here you often use your internal intercostal muscles, but in the animation of the big bad wolf, I'm sure you got the idea of what forced expiration is. So here's a recap of the aims we went through in this tutorial. As usual, use them as questions to consolidate your learning. Please do like and subscribe if you found this video useful. I thank you for watching and I will see you in the next one.